Hey guys, this is Lisa here. Can y'all believe it's a new year? I can't. I'm wishing y'all a great 2025. Alright, let's get started on this new heart pendant project. The materials you'll need are as follows: 18 and 24 gauge wire, a bench block, a chasing hammer, round nose pliers, chain nose pliers, bent chain nose pliers, flush cutters, a combination nylon flat and metal round nose pliers, 4mm mandrel, and a metric ruler. As always, we will start off with some wire. In this case, we're going to use some 18 gauge copper wire. Of course, you can use any color wire you'd like, but we are going to use copper wire for this project. So first we're going to start off by measuring about 12 centimeters of wire. As you can see, I'm doing here. And then using my flush cutters, I'm going to cut that wire free from the spool. Now I'm going to find center of this wire, which is 6 centimeters. And then I'm going to grab my combination nylon flat nose and round nose pliers. I like using these because it doesn't mar the wire as much when you're making loops. You can just use a regular pair of round nose pliers to do this as well. This is just what I like to do. So now I'm going to fold that wire in half around that round nose part of the pliers. And then I'm going to cross my wires over. I'm making a little teardrop shape with this loop. So I'm not making a full loop, just teardrop shape there. So the bottom of this V shape is going to be the heart. And there you can see that little teardrop shaped loop. And next I'm just going to adjust where I want these and straighten out my wires. And now I'm going to make my first bend where the top of the heart will be. So I'm going to bend that down back parallel with this bottom part of the heart, like that. And now I'm going to take the other side and do the same thing, bending it back, down, parallel with that other side of the heart. Now I'm going to grab that leftmost tail end of the wire and put it back behind all of the whole pendant. So that these wires are now, that one is behind everything, the other one is down inside the other part of the heart. And you'll see why I'm doing that here in a second. And there it is, the start. So now I'm going to take that right tail and bend that back up around the back side of the left tail. So there you can see what I'm doing. Basically clamping this wire down to that left tail end. And now I'm going to grab my chain nose pliers and make a little bend where that wire meets against that base wire. So I'm going to clamp it down a little bit here first to make sure it's tight. And then I'll make that bend. I'm grabbing that wire and then bend it out. So you can see how it just lays nicely up against the frame of that heart. And then just leaving that wire there, that's going to make our bail in a minute here for that heart pendant. Now this tail end I'm going to take and cut off a little bit of the tip there to make it flush. And I'm going to just take the end of that tail and bend it into a swirl on the other side of that heart. So you can watch how I do that here. I'm going to grab that tail and just bend it around and back up. Now you can either use all of this wire in your swirl, but I just wanted just a smaller little swirl, so I'm going to cut the end of this off to just fit in there. But you could use the whole thing if you'd like. So I'm going to take this and bend it out to make it easier to cut the tip of that off. And I'm also going to hammer the end of this to kind of make a little paddle at the end of the wire, as you'll see here in a minute. So that's another reason why I bend it out, to make it easier to hammer that. So you can see that it's out, and I'm going to hammer that end. I'm going to grab my bench block and the chasing hammer here in a second. And now I'm just going to hammer this out away from the wire. So what this does is it causes that wire to pull out away from the main part of the wire. So it makes like a little paddle at the end of the wire. And you'll see here in a second once I finish. So there you can see that little paddle. As you can see, it's pretty flat at the top end there, and it's also a little bit sharp because it's a cut end. So I'm going to take a needle file, a diamond needle file, and I'm going to file the corners of this down and make it nice and smooth. No jagged edges or pointy. This will keep the end of that wire from catching on things like sweaters or whatever might get caught in there. And there we go, getting it all nice and filed, and here you can see how it looks nice and rounded now. Nice and smooth to the touch. So now we're going to bend this back in place, and then with my chain nose pliers I'm going to go ahead and bend the end of that in toward the middle of that circle or swirl, whatever you'd like to call that. Time grabbing it here. There we go. And there's the beginning of your pendant. Now the next step is to shape the bail. So now I'm going to bend that up just a little bit, and I'm going to grab this wire with my round nose pliers. I'm going to grab it right in the crevice of that heart. And about a quarter of the way up those round nose pliers, I'm making the bail pretty small. I'm going to wrap that wire around those pliers. We're just going to make a loop until that wire meets back to itself. So while I'm adjusting this little loop and getting it the way I want to, I just wanted to say I hope y'all had a good holiday and that you have an extremely happy new year. Hoping the best for all of you. So here you can see I've got that loop in place, and I'm going to grab my flush cutters and flush cut that loop right where it meets back against itself. And then with my chain nose pliers, I'm going to press that back into place so it's all closed up. And there you can see the pendant is all formed. And now, having placed my bench block, I'm going to hammer this heart frame. So I like to flip my pendant upside down and hammer from the back side because it makes it a little flatter on the front side and less tool marks that can happen. I'm going to start with that little teardrop shaped loop and then work my way up the side of the heart. And then when I get toward the top here, I'm going to hammer out away from the piece to make that wire pull out to the side there. You're going to see what that looks like here in just a second. So there you can see it's flattened and pulled up and away from that pendant. Just gives it a nice little flare. So I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, starting at the bottom of the heart, working my way up, and then hammering out away from the piece at the top of the heart there where it's curved. This just takes me a minute here, get that desired look. And there you could see that flared wire out to the sides there. You don't have to hammer your piece. I enjoy doing it just because it gives it a nice shine, catches the light nicely. So now I'm gonna adjust my loop because hammering kind of makes everything a little off kilter. So grabbing my chain nose pliers, I'm going to make the adjustment and get that loop back up on top like where it's supposed to be. And as you can see, there are a few little tool marks on this, but I'm going to show you how to fix that. You don't have to use expensive tools to polish up your pieces, so I'm going to show you how I do this with these micro mesh pads that I have. They're little micro mesh sanding pads. And as you can see, it goes from 1500 all the way to 12,000 grit. And I'm going to start with this 1500 grit because I've got some pretty deep tool marks right here on the edge where it had gotten underneath the frame on this little bit of a bail. And so I'm going to work to get that out. You could start at a little bit of a higher grit if you don't have these deeper tool marks. You want to make sure that you work really well with this lower grit before moving up the step with your higher grits, because you want to make sure you get all those little marks out before moving on to get a better polish in the end. Now I'm going to grab the 1800 and then my 2400 and 3200, 3600, 4000, 6000, 8,000. And finally, 120,000. So now I'm going to grab some of this 24 gauge copper wire, and I'm going to pull off about 6 inches of that wire from the spool, straighten it out, and then grab my flush cutters and cut off that 6 inches from the spool. And then I'm going to take my heart pendant and put this 24 gauge wire through that pendant, and then wrap that wire around that heart pendant. I'm going to do about 3 wraps to secure it here at first. And then I'm going to grab a couple of my red-brown Jasper beads. I have 2 different sizes here. One is a 4mm and the other is a 6mm. We're going to start off with the 6mm red Jasper or red-brown Jasper bead, as you can see here. And I'm going to go ahead and thread that onto the 24 gauge wire. And then put that bead inside of the frame, and then wrap that 24 gauge wire around the frame of this wire 3 times. There's 2, and then 1 more time. There's 3. Come back up through the top, and then push those wraps nice and snug up against each other. And there you can see it's secured to the frame there. And now we're going to grab one of the 4mm beads and thread that onto the 24 gauge wire. Whoops! It's always fun with beads. There we go. We're going to thread that on there. And we're going to wrap this around 3 times just like we did the last one. So there's 1 wrap. And I'm just going to check to see how that fits. All nice and snug. And I'm going to continue wrapping the other 2 wraps. There's 2. And 1 more wrap. And here comes the last 4mm bead for inside the frame. Now we're going to wrap this around 3 times. 1, 2, and 3. Bring it back up through the frame to finish it off. So here I've noticed there's a little space on each end of these beads. So I'm going to add 2 more wraps to the top here to make it a total of 5 wraps. And I'm going to bring that tail end up behind the frame and cut it off. I use my chain nose pliers to pull it tight. And then push those wraps all the way over to the bail. And I'm going to do the same with this side. One wrap, then one more. Two. And now I'm going to cut off the tail ends of these wraps. I'm going to cut them in the back of the pendant. So I'm trying to adjust here where it's easier for me to cut the flush side, the flush cutter. And I want to cut it so that I can tuck that little tail inside of the frame so it's not going to catch on anything. So I'm going to grab my bent nose pliers and just twist that down into the frame. So then there's no jagged edge there. It's pushed right down in there. And I'm going to do the same for this other side. Cut it flush. There we go. And then bend that over and tuck it down. This little tail end wanted to give me a little struggle. There we go. There we go. Finally got that tucked in there. So there you have it. Now we're going to use this last 6mm red-brown Jasper bead. And we're going to take the remainder of our 24 gauge wire and make a little head pin out of this. So I'm going to grab my round nose pliers. And just with the tip of these pliers, I'm going to make a little loop, and I'm going to loop around the tip of these pliers 2 times. Until it meets the tail end of the first wire. Right there. And now I'm going to grab my bent chain nose pliers and just grab inside of those loops as gently as possible. I actually got a little tool mark on this by doing that, so be careful when you're squeezing this in and together. And I'm going to take the other tail end of this wire and bend it back into the loops like that. So we're making a little lasso here. And then I'm going to grab my chain nose and adjust those little loops once again. Make sure they're all flush up against each other. And then pull that lasso in through those loops as tight as possible. And then using my nylon jaws, I'm going to hold on to that lasso end and pull the other tail end up through the little loops we created. So I just basically made a little knot with this 24 gauge wire. And there you can see that tool mark right there. After I finished this project, I went back and redid this part because I didn't like the tool marks on there. I'm a bit of a perfectionist when it comes to this kind of thing. So now you have a little knotted head pin. And Here you can see my perfectionism coming out. I got it all knotted up, and now I'm going to take that 6mm red-brown Jasper bead and thread it on to the tail end of that 24 gauge wire. Now you can see how that looks on there. And I'm going to grab my chain nose pliers and grab at the top of the bead to make just a little space at the top of this wire before I bend over the wire to make my loop. So I'm going to bend this at a 90-degree angle. And then with my round nose pliers, I'm going to make a loop right there at the bend. I'm going to grab right here and then loop around my round nose pliers, readjusting as I need to. And I'm not going to close the loop up yet because I want to put this on that teardrop loop on the bottom of my heart pendant. So I'm going to thread that through there, just like so. And now I'm going to wrap that tail end around that little space we created at the top of the bead. I'm going to wrap around 3 times. 1, 2, and 3. You can kind of see that completed. So now we just need to cut that tail. I'm going to cut it right where it ends on that back side. That 3rd loop around. And then taking my bent chain nose pliers, I'm going to tuck that little tail end right up against the bead and the base wire under that where it's wrapped. Nice and tight so nothing's sticking out. And it's all flush. And there you can see a little bead at the end there, almost like a little bleeding heart. And there's the pendant pretty much complete. All we need to do is add a little bail onto the top of that pendant. So I'm going to grab some 18 gauge copper wire and my 4mm Mandrel, which is basically a brass rod. I'm going to wrap a few of these around here. I always like to make a few extra jump rings when I'm doing this for other projects. Since I'm already doing it, might as well go ahead. And there, I've wrapped it around a few times. I'm going to grab my flush cutters and with the flush side, cut off the end of that. So I have a flush cut on the end of this wire right here. And then turn my flush cutters over and cut the other end flush. So the 2 flush ends meet in the jump ring. I'm going to cut this one off and put that aside for the next project. Now I'm going to take this jump ring we just made and open that up. So when you open jump rings, you always want to twist them. Never pull them apart, always twist. So there you can see I've twisted it open. And I'm going to loop that through. And then I'm going to close this up the same way we opened it, twisting it back. Bringing it just past and then back together. That just hardens the wire a bit, work hardens that wire. And there you could see it's nice and flush and closed up. And now we have a completed pendant. Oops. There we go. Isn't that the cutest thing? Okay, next we're going to grab the chain. In this case, I am using a copper chain. I'm going to run that through there. I like to use oxidized copper chain. It's already oxidized and ready to go. And there's the completed pendant. What do you guys think? I really think this is cute. It turned out really good. I hope you guys enjoyed watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.